sister.
Assalamu alaikum. As the Sheikh said, I'm the attorney for CAIR Michigan, and CAIR Michigan, for those of you who don't know, we're a Muslim civil rights organization that protects and advocates for the rights of Michigan Muslims in all realms of society, whether it's with law enforcement, in schools, with public governments, or with the federal government, inshallah.
هي عضوة من أعضاء منظمة كير التي تدافع عن حقوق المسلمين في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في كل أماكن، سواء في الشرطة أو في المدارس أو مع الحكومة الفيدرالية.
We have a lot of different aspects of what we do. What I mostly do is I come into the community and I educate the community about what your legal rights are in different scenarios, whether it's while you're traveling across the international border or at your school, if you're going to public school, or at the workplace. I also litigate cases in both federal and state court. We file lawsuits on behalf of Muslims in both state and federal courts.
هم يعملوا عدة أشياء منها تعليم الناس عن حقوقهم القانونية، بالإضافة إلى الدفاع عنهم في أي أمور مختلفة مثل أمور السفر، المدارس العامة أو في العمل. وهم يرفعوا قضايا في المحاكم الفيدرالية أو في المحاكم حق الولاية كمان.
Inshallah, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what your rights are when you encounter law enforcement in 3 different areas. The first is going to be when you encounter law enforcement if you're traveling internationally and you're returning to the U.S. from international travel. The second is when you encounter law enforcement in your homes. And the third will be if you encounter law enforcement in a public space, say maybe if you're driving in your car or perhaps at your place of employment.
اليوم سأتكلم لكم عن حقوقكم، ماذا يحدث عندما تصادف جهات تنفيذ القانون كالشرطة. ففي 3 أماكن سأتحدث عنها. الأول عندما تسافر خارج البلاد أو ترجع خارج البلاد وتجد الشرطة أو الجهات القانونية، أو عندما تأتي الشرطة إليك في البيت، أو في الأماكن العامة زي ما الشرطة تقابلك لما تكون تسوق سيارة ولا حاجة.
What's important to know is when you're traveling across an international border, say you went back home to Yemen or you're going to Canada, maybe you went to Mexico on vacation with your family, everybody who re-enters the United States, no matter what your status is, whether you are a citizen, a lawful permanent resident, or you're just a visitor, or here on a visitor visa or a work visa, everybody has to get inspected at the border. That's for everybody. You have to present information that shows who you are and what your right to enter the United States is.
بخصوص السفر عبر حدود الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية أو حتى إلى اليمن أو إلى كندا أو المكسيك، فعند رجوعك مهما كان وضعك القانوني، يعني لو كنت سيتيزن أو زائر أو جرين كارد، لازم عليهم أنهم يحصلوا معلومات منك، من أنت وماذا تفعل ولماذا سافرت وهذه الحاجات.
In order to enter the United States, you have to have some lawful purpose to be here. You either have to have a citizenship, you have to have your green card, or you have to have a visa to enter the United States, and you have to be inspected. And that includes your person, and anything that you're carrying, such as your luggage, has to go through inspections to make sure that you're entering lawfully and you're only bringing those items with you that are lawful to bring back into the United States.
وعندما يتم فحصك لازم يكون لك سبب ليش أنت تيجي أمريكا. فهم مهما كان عن جنسية أو جرين كارد أو فيزا لازم يتم فحصك في الحدود. وقد تمام يفحصوك شخصيا، يفتشوك أنت شخصيا، أو قد يفتشوا العفشة اللي معك يتأكدوا ما عندك أي حاجة ممنوعة أو غير قانونية تدخل البلاد.
And I know a lot of people, especially the younger kids who are born here, they teach you about your constitutional rights when you're in school. You have a lot of constitutional rights. However, none of those rights apply to you fully at the border, even if you're a U.S. citizen. So there really are 3 tiers of rights at the border. If you're a U.S. citizen, you have some rights, but even the rights you have are very diminished or made smaller. And then if you're a lawful permanent resident, you have a few rights, but not really so many. And if you are here on a visa, whether it's a visitor visa, an H-1B work visa, a J-1 student visa, you basically have zero rights at the border. I like to tell people that if you have a visa, it doesn't really even guarantee you entry into the country. Having a visa means that you have the right to come and knock on the door and ask to be let in, but it doesn't mean that they have to open a door for you and let you in. So really, visa holders don't have any rights at the border.
هي تعرف كثير من الناس خصوصا الشباب اللي يدرسوا في المدارس اللي ولدوا وتربوا هنا، يعلمون في المدارس عن حقوقهم الدستورية وكمواطنين ايش الحقوق هذه، ولكن هذه الحقوق لا تنطبق على الحدود الأمريكية، لأن لما تذهب إلى الحدود الأمريكية في ثلاث مستويات الإنسان المتجنس أمريكي، ولكن مقارنة بالحقوق الدستورية اللي يعلموها هي أقل من الحقوق الدستورية المفروض لك لما أنت داخل البلاد. وبعدين الجرين كارد حقوقك أقل من حقوق اللي مع الجنسية الأمريكية من السيتيزن. وطبعا هناك الآخر حق هو حق لما يكون عندك فيزا حق الهجرة وتجي إلى أمريكا ما عندك أي حق بالخالص، صفر الحقوق، هو فقط الفيزا هذه سماح لك أنك تطلب أنك تدخل إلى أمريكا، ولكن من حقهم أنهم يمنعوك أنك تدخل حتى لو عندك الفيزا.
So if you're a U.S. citizen, no matter what happens at the border, they have to let you in. So you have really, as a U.S. citizen, you have a lot of ways to protect yourself at the border from intrusive questioning or intrusive invasion into your privacy, because no matter what you do, unless they think you committed a crime and they're going to arrest you and put you in jail, which is very, very unlikely, they have to let you in the country. So there's a lot of things that you can refuse to do. So if you're a U.S. citizen and you have to go through customs, they ask you, where have you been, what countries have you been to, and what are you bringing back with you? And you have to present your identification document. Two things are very important. Make sure you have your passport, and also make sure you identify every country that you've traveled to, because sometimes they know you've traveled to a different country, even if you didn't tell them. So you have to be very honest with them. So those are the two things that you really have to tell customs when you're coming in. And everybody has to say that, but for U.S. citizens, that's really the extent of what you have to do. You have to present yourself, and you have to present where you've been, and you have to present what you're bringing back with you. And then other than that, you don't have to answer any questions at the border.
لو أنت معك الجنسية الأمريكية فلديك حقوق كثيرة في الحدود. هم طبعا ما يقدروش إلا يسألوك من أنت، في أي الدول اللي سافرت لها، وأنت لازم تقول لهم هذه المعلومات، في من أنت، وتعرف عن نفسك، وتوريهم الجواز، وتقول لهم الدول اللي سافرت يعني، ولازم تقول لهم لأنهم بعض الأحيان هم قد يكونوا already عارفين لفين سافرت. طبعا هم ما يقدروش يعملوا لك أي حاجة، لازم يسمحوا لك بالدخول لأمريكا لو أنت متجنس، إلا إذا هم اعتقدوا أنك ارتكبت جريمة أو حاجة خطيرة، فمن حقهم أنهم إيش يمنعوك من الدخول ويمسكوك. بشكل عام لازم تعرف عن نفسك إلى أين سافرت، تريهم الآيدي حقك اللي هي الجواز.
If you're a U.S. citizen and everybody goes to the initial station, they ask you all these regular questions, and then they pull you aside, and that's called secondary screening. And they do that a lot to U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and visa holders. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. They want to hold you for a little bit longer. They want to ask you more intrusive questions. And this is where really the ability to protect your privacy changes based on your legal status in the United States. If you get pulled into secondary screening and they start to ask you, and you're a U.S. citizen, and they start to ask you questions other than for your identity and where you've been and what you're bringing back, you have the absolute right to refuse to answer questions, and you should. Sometimes as Muslims, we say we don't have anything to hide, we want to try to be helpful, but I promise you it's never helpful for you to answer questions when you're under duress and they're holding you and they're asking questions that are really literally none of their business. So if you're a U.S. citizen and you get pulled into secondary screening, the only thing that you should answer is to prove your U.S. citizenship status so that they can let you in. And you can tell them, I don't have to answer these questions. I'm a U.S. citizen. You have to let me in. I would like you to release me. And you should say all of those things.
لو أنت طبعا متجنس، طبعا طالما تصل المطار يسألوك أسئلة عادية، ولكن في بعض الأحيان قد يحبوا يتأكدوا أكثر فيسحبوك على جنب، يسمى التفتيش الثاني، يخلوك أكثر وقت هناك يحتجزوك. فانت مش ملزم من لانك تجاوب على 3 حاجات: الهويه حقك، تثبت لهم انك يعني يحق لك الدخول الى امريكا، واي الدول الذي كنت لها، وماذا احضرت معك من هذه الدوله. طبعا نحن كمسلمين بعض الاحيان نحاول ان احنا نقول انا ما عنديش حاجه اخبيها، بقول لهم كل حاجه وبعطيهم المعلومات اللي شو هذا، فبتقول لك الافضل لا ما تعملش هذه الحاجه. يعني انك بعض الاحيان لما تكون تحت الضغط قد تكلم كلام غلط، قد ما يعجبهمش هذه الحاجات، فقول لهم انا بس بجاوب على هذه الاشياء الثلاثه: اثبت الاي دي حقي، واين الدول اللي زرتها، وانا ايش جبت معي في هذه. فانت لازم كمواطن امريكي مش لازم تجاوب على الاسئله الاخرى. قول لهم انا ممكن تقول لهم انا بس بقول لكم هذه الاجوبه فقط، هذا الذي عندي.
If you're a lawful permanent resident and you get pulled into secondary screening, you still have the same rights as a U.S. citizen. It's very unlikely that they're not going to parole you in, but not answering certain types of questions can have them trigger your immigration status for review. Especially, sometimes I know that we stay out of the country a little bit longer than we should. Maybe we're back home, we have a sick family member that we're visiting, so we have to be careful about that. So when you're a lawful permanent resident, you should provide just a little bit more leeway for the types of questions you're going to answer. Like if they've asked you like where you traveled to, if say I went, my husband's from the Ivory Coast, so I went to the Ivory Coast with my husband, and they want to ask, and I'm a lawful permanent resident, and they want to ask me, where did you go to in the Ivory Coast? I might say, you know, I stayed with my mother, or I went to these 4 cities and visited these sites. If you're a U.S. citizen, you don't have to give that information, but as a lawful permanent resident, you have to kind of gauge how much you're willing to push back, because it could have immigration consequences for you in the end.
طبعا بالنسبه لحامل الجرين كارد الامر يختلف شويه، معك نفس الحقوق اللي تكلمنا عنها ولكن بمستوى اقل. انك اذا رفضت تجاوب عن هذه الاسئله فقد يؤدي هذا الى انهم يروحوا يراجعوا تاريخ الهجره تبعك. نعرف بعض الناس مثلا واحد قد يتاخر في اليمن او قد عن الوقت المناسب، فهم في هذه الحاله قد يسببوا لك ايش؟ مشاكل. فهي بتقول لك يعني في هذا الحاله قد تعطيهم معلومات اكثر، تقعد معهم مثلا، هي تقول مثلا هي لو راحت لساحل العاج، لو هي مثلا مع جرين كارد راحت لساحل العاج، عم بيسألها لو وين رحتي في ساحل العاج، ايش المدن اللي زرتيها، عند من جلستي. في هذه الحاله قد يكون من الافضل انك تعطيهم هذه المعلومات عشان ايش؟ ما تسبب ايش؟ مشاكل اكثر. طبعا يعني هذا الجرين كارد فقط. اما الجنسيه ممكن بكل ثقه تقول لهم لا بجاوب على هذه وهذه وهذه، ما يقدروش يمنعوك تدخل.
If you're a visa holder, it doesn't matter what kind of visa, but any type of visa holder other than a lawful permanent resident, and they pull you into secondary screening, you have to answer all of their questions. Failing to answer questions will very likely get you turned around and sent back to the country that you most recently came from. So you have to answer their questions, even if they're very intrusive, even if they don't have anything to do with your presence at the border that day. Not answering questions will get you turned around. And if you are a visa holder and you're trying to enter the U.S. and you think that they're not going to let you to enter the U.S., it's better to ask to withdraw your request for entry. Because if you withdraw your request for entry, they don't deny you entry, you could try again on your visa to come back in on a different day.
واذا كنت حامل فيزا، ما يهمش اي نوع من الفيزا، فيجب عليك ان تجاوب على ايش؟ كل الاسئله. يعني ما لكش الحقوق حق الجرين كارد او الحقوق حق السيتيزن، لانهم من حقهم انهم يرجعوك لبلدك يعني بدون اي سبب. يعني حتى اذا سالوك عن حاجات ما لها علاقه بالهجره، يعني حاجات شخصيه او يعني تعرف لازم تجاوب لو انت حامل فيزا. في حاله انك اذا توقعت انهم ما بيسمحوا لك بالدخول، يعني اكتشفت من اسئلتهم انك خلاص ما فيش امل انك تدخل امريكا، اطلب منهم ايش؟ انك تسحب طلب الدخول. قل خلاص انا مش عاوز ادخل امريكا، رجعوني. ليش؟ انك لو سحبت طلب الدخول يسمحوا لك انك تخرج من امريكا، بعدين تحاول ترجع بعد ما تصحح الامور بنفس الفيزا. بس اذا كنسلوا الفيزا ولا هذه الحاجه خلاص ما يقدروش يسمحوا لك تدخل، فتقول لهم ايش؟ انا عاوز اسحب طلب، مش عاوز ادخل امريكا خلاص. ففي هذه الحاله if you request the withdrawal they won't cancel his visa, right?
That's correct.
إذا طلبت إنك تسحب طلب الدخول حقك، الفيزا بتكون لازالت سارية المفعول، بس إذا كنسلوها خلاص ما قدرت تعملها. فإذا اعتقدت أنهم ما بيخلوكش تدخل، قل لهم أنا عاوز أسحب طلبي دخول أمريكا.
So Also, what we see when people get pulled into secondary screening, we see people waiting a very long time. You're there 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours. And sometimes they bring people to question you who don't have uniforms on. Most of the time when they bring somebody to question you who does not have a CBP uniform or badge, it's FBI. FBI doesn't have any jurisdiction at the border, but FBI cannot question you without an attorney present anywhere other than at the border. So they will try to sneak in law enforcement interrogations at the border, even if there's no suspicion that you've done anything wrong. They're just fishing for information, which is why if you're a U.S. citizen, you should absolutely refuse to answer questions at the border. And if you're a lawful permanent resident, you should push back as much as you feel comfortable with answering questions at the border that are not directly related to your travel, because it's not just CBP, it's the FBI that is getting involved. And if you've been at the border for 2 hours and you have people interrogating you at the border and you're a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you should ask to speak to a supervisor. And you should tell the supervisor that you believe that your constitutional rights are being harmed. And if you're a U.S. citizen, you should ask to speak with an attorney. They'll tell you you don't have a right to an attorney at the border, but that is not true. You actually do have a right to an attorney if you're in custody at the border, only if you're a U.S. citizen.
طبعا في خلال التفتيش الثاني والاستجوابات الثانية قد تنتظر وقت طويل، 2 3 4 5 6 10، وقد يحضر لك ناس بلباس مدني ما عندهم اللباس الرسمي حق شرطة الحدود. ففي معظم الأحيان هذا الناس يكونون تبع الاف بي اي، هم يبحثون يعني يصطادوا معلومات، يعرفوا معلومات أخرى. فإذا كنت مثلا أنت متجنس أو من حقك أنك ترفض الإجابة عن أسئلتهم وكل حاجة، أو مع الجرين كارد ممكن تحاول تدفع بأكبر قدر ممكن. إذا قعدت في الحدود في هذا حجزوك أكثر من 2 ساعتين، من حقك أنك تطلب سوبرفايزر، تقول شكل مع السوبرفايزر وتقول له أنا أعتقد أن حقوق الدستورية يتم انتهاكها. وإذا كنت متجنس معك الجنسية الأمريكية، من حقك أنك تطلب محامي. قد يقولوا لك مش من حقك تطلب محامي، بس هذا كذب. أنت من حقك إيش؟ أنك يكون عندك محامي إذا كنت متجنس جنسية أمريكية.
If you're a lawful permanent resident, unfortunately, asking for a supervisor is not going to alleviate if you're a visa holder and not a lawful permanent resident or a citizen, asking for a supervisor is not going to assist you in your, desire to get in the United States, and you have no right to ask for any type of attorney or any other assistance at the border.
إذا كنت حامل فيزا، ففي هذه الحاجة لن يفيدك أي شيء أنك ما عندكش حق في الطلب أنك تتكلم مع السوبرفايزر، لن يساعدك هذا الأمر في الدخول إلى أمريكا، وكمان أيضا لا حق لك في أنك تطلب محامي يمثلك.
So I know a lot of us, we all like to travel with electronic devices. I have a cell phone that literally has my entire life on it, right? Like it has my work email, it has my work files, it has my personal pictures, personal email, all my personal contacts. I have hundreds of contacts. I don't even know some of the people that I'm in contact with. They're old contacts. We're all in different WhatsApp groups. We're in different Signal groups now. So what should we do with our electronic devices? Because our electronic devices carry a lot of personal information that maybe we don't want law enforcement at the border to have access to, even if we're not doing anything wrong, right? Maybe you have a picture of your wife or your daughter without her hijab on. We don't want people to have access to this. So we have to take very, very good precautions to protect our electronic information at the border.
بخصوص الأجهزة الإلكترونية، زي مثلا أتكلم عن التليفون، حقها في حياتها الكاملة، فيها معلومات كثيرة عنك، فيها معلومات الأشخاص اللي تتواصل معهم، بعض الناس حتى أنت ما تعرفهم ممكن تتعامل معهم من زمان. فهذه الأجهزة الإلكترونية تحتوي على معلومات كثيرة، ونحن مثلا قد يكون هذا الجهاز يحتوي على حاجات أنت مش عاوز الناس الثانيين يطلعوا عليها. يعني تطلب تضع مثل زي قد تكون فيها صورة زوجتك أو بنتك بدون حجاب، وهذه فإيش الخطوات اللي نعملها عشان إيش هذه ما تأثر علينا.
If you're at the border and a customs agent asks you to give them your phone, you have to physically hand them your phone. You have to. If you don't hand them your phone, you will not, you're not in compliance with the law, and they can hold you and it can cause some other problems. But if you're a lawful permanent resident and you're a U.S. citizen, you absolutely do not have to give the CBP agents access to your phone, which means you do not have to give them a password to it. And you do not have to open it and let them review it if you're a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen.
لو كنت في الحدود وطلبوا منك انك تعطيهم التلفون، لازم تعطيهم التلفون، يعني الجهاز نفسه تعطيهم. ولكن اذا لم تعطيهم فيعتبروك مخالف للقانون، قد يتخذوا اجراءات ثانيه. ولكن بالتاكيد انت مش ملزوم انك تعطيهم الباسورد حق تفتح لهم الباسورد هذا، تعطيهم الباسورد حق التلفون، او تفتح لهم انت التلفون يشوفوا ايش اللي فيه اذا كنت متجنس او مع جرين كارد.
If you're a visa holder, you have to actually open your phone or provide the password. You don't have a choice, but U.S. citizens do not. So it's very important to realize that a lot of new phones have a lot of great technology, which seemingly protects your phone from invasion, but also makes it easier for you to access. We're talking about fingerprint technology and facial recognition technology. At the border, that is not enough to secure your phone. If you have a phone that you're traveling across the border, you have to disable the fingerprint access and the face recognition access. Because if you have fingerprint access or facial recognition access, CBP can force you to open your phone with your face or with your finger, and that's not a violation of the law. You have to put an actual password on it. It could be a PIN number of any digits. It could be letters and numbers or just letters. They have like swipe codes that you can use, like patterns. All of those are that you create yourself that are unique, are enough to protect your phone. But your face and your finger are not enough to protect your phone from CBP.
طبعا اذا كان عندك فيزا لازم تفتح لهم التلفون، يعني ما يحميش القانون تعطيهم الباسورد وتفتح لهم التلفون. يعتقد ان كثير من التلفونات الايام هذه في عندها حاجات زي البصمه او الوجه تخلي الواحد يقدر يفتح التلفون. فهذه الحاجات مش دفاع كافي، يعني هم من حقهم انهم يستخدموا بصمتك، يعني يمسكوك في تبصم او ياخذوا صوره من تلفون حقك وانهم يفتحوا التلفون. ففي هذه الحاجه من الافضل انك تحط كلمه سر، باسورد، ارقام وحروف، او تحط هذه ما تمشي الخطوط، يعني بحيث انهم ايش ما يقدروش يعرفوها الا اذا انت فتحتها لهم.
It's also important when you're traveling internationally that when you have your phone, if you have anything that's cloud-based, like your like a Dropbox, Google Photos, Google Drive, your Gmail account or your Outlook mail account, anything that you can sign out of, you should sign out of it before you enter the United States. Just sign out of it and make your phone forget the password, because they cannot access your cloud-based information without a warrant, even if they seize your phone. So in order to protect yourself, sign out. And one thing that I like to do, I have all of my contacts, my telephone contacts, backed up to a Gmail account. And I sign out of the Gmail account. And that wipes my phone from all of the contacts so that they don't have my contacts. Because I guarantee you what we know from looking at what CBP and what the FBI and what Department of State are doing with our phones, and the questions they're asking people at the border, they're looking to see how Muslims are connected in the United States and around the world. And one of the things they're most interested in is who are you talking to? Whose phone number is in your phone? So they really want that information. So if you have the ability to upload your contacts to a Google account and sign out of the Google account, you should absolutely be doing that when we enter the United States.
يعني خلال السفر دوليا بخصوص المعلومات اللي تحفظ في مش في التلفون حقك، تحفظ في الكلاود، يعني مثلا في الدروب بوكس او في الجيميل، هم يشتوا يعرفوا يعني مع من تواصل، مع المسؤولين، من هذا بيتكلم مع من، هذا بيتكلم مع من، هذا بيتكلم. فهي تنصح انها في هذه الحاله قبل ما تسافر انك تخرج معلوماتك من التلفون، معلومات الناس مثل الكونتاكتس اللي بتتصل فيهم، وتحطهم على الجيميل ولا على الويب، بعدين تخرج من الحساب، تبعد هذا الحساب بحيث انه يبان ما في عندك اي كونتاكتس. اهم حاجه الجهات الحكوميه هذا بتدور على كيف يعني شو يرسموا شبكه كامله، من بتواصل مع من، فلان بتواصل مع هذا وهذا بتواصل مع هذا وهذا، يعني يعرفوا كل التواصل بين المسلمين ايش بيحصل.
I can give you one cautionary tale that we have. I have I know people do this to me. People will add me to a WhatsApp group for whatever good purpose it may be. I just get added. Maybe the WhatsApp group has 350 people in it. I don't know everybody in the WhatsApp group. They're not even all from Michigan. Sometimes they're not even all from the United States. But we have seen where people have gotten questioned at the border about somebody that they've never met. And they have been told your name is in their phone, in their WhatsApp group. So when I say that they're looking to see how we're connected and who we're speaking to, we sometimes have problems at the border and with law enforcement simply by guilty by association. They're looking at somebody else and somehow we're loosely connected to them, so they think that we can give them information that we don't even have. And then next thing you know, we have a problem. This is why it's very important that we protect our information and we don't answer questions at the border, because they're not using it for any lawful purpose. They're just looking at us.
هي تقول قصص تحذيرية عن ناس كثير حصلت لهم في الحدود. بعض الأحيان يتم إضافة اسمك إلى مجموعة في الواتساب قد يكون فيها 300 400 إنسان وكل حاجة. طبعا أنت ما تعرف كل الناس الموجودين في هذه المجموعة، يعني قد يكون في أشخاص ولايات ثانية أو بلاد ثانية. فإيش بيحصل بعض الأحيان بيشوفوا الناس في الحدود بيسألهم عن ناس هم ما بيعرفوش أي حاجة عنهم، بس بيقولوا لنا اسمهم كان موجود، اسمك كان موجود بالتلفون حقهم يعني. فهم يشتوا يعرفوا هذه المعلومات، يعني يتعبوك هذا عشان اسمك مثلا موجود في اسم واحد مشبوه فيه. فلذلك توري هذه القضية أهمية حماية معلوماتك، أنك ما يشوفوش المعلومات حقك، ولازم زي ما قالت أول أنك تحفظها في مكان آخر وتخرج من الأكاونت، ما تديهمش كل المعلومات حقك، يسبب لك المشاكل هذه الحاجات.
So some types of questions that nobody has to answer at the border, other than visa holders, and which are actually illegal for them to ask you at the border, are questions about your political affiliation. And that means your political affiliation in the United States and your political ideologies about whatever's going on overseas. We know sometimes when there's conflicts overseas, people that have national origins from that country will get pulled aside and ask questions about how do you feel about whatever events are happening in your home country. Those are illegal questions. They cannot ask you those questions. They can't ask you who you voted for. They can't ask you what political party you belong to. They cannot ask you about your religion. It is illegal and unconstitutional for them to ask you about your religion. And that includes bringing somebody who speaks Arabic, who's from your home country, to speak to you in your home language, to ask you about your religion, or just to even have a conversation with you. That's not appropriate. It has no place at the border. It has no place in law enforcement, but we've seen them do it. Some people coming back from Hajj have problems. They want to ask about Hajj. We know that piety is a test that they use to determine who's getting on the watch list. We know people who come back from Ziyarah are having issues, and they're getting asked about those. All of those questions are illegal. They cannot ask you about your social media presence. They can't ask you your social media username or your social media passwords. All of those types of questions are red flags, and you should respectfully decline to answer them by saying, I'm a U.S. citizen or I'm a lawful permanent resident holder. You can't stop me from entering. That's not an appropriate question. Please release me into the country.
هناك أسئلة غير قانونية ما يحق لهم أنهم يسألوك إياها، مثلا انتمائك السياسي في أمريكا، يعني أي حزب أنت مشارك فيه، أو من انتخبت، لمن صوت، أو أي حزب تنتمي إليه، أو خصوصا عن دينك، إيش ديانتك، أو هذه الحاجات. بعض الأحيان قد يحضر لك واحد شخص يتكلم نفس لغتك ويحاول يسألك هذه الأسئلة، ولكن ليس لهم حق في أنهم يسألوك هذه الأسئلة. هذه الأمور غير قانونية، وليس لهم حق أن يسألوك عن مثلا معلوماتك في وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، مثلا تقول أعطينا اسم المستخدم أو الباسورد. هذا إذا كنت طبعا مجنس أو جرين كارد، هذه الأشياء كلها ما يحق لهم. أن تقول لهم لو سمحت أنا مش عاوز أجيب عن الأسئلة، سيبوا اطلقوا سراحي وخلونا نخرج نروح. هذه الحاجات طبعا هذه مش لأصحاب الفيزا بس، هذه لمن اللي معهم جنسية ومعهم جرين كارد.
And most importantly, if you're a lawful permanent resident or you're a visa holder, do not ever sign anything at the border. Do not sign any paperwork at the border, and especially do not sign anything that is not written in a language that you can read and understand fluently. You should never sign anything that a lawyer has not looked at. If you are a lawful permanent resident, we have seen people who've had difficulties traveling, who've accidentally sign their rights to their green cards away because someone said if you sign this paper it'll be easier for you, and you sign the paper and you voluntarily given up your green card. And when you voluntarily give up your green card at the border, you have a very, very difficult time ever getting it back again. So do not ever sign any documents at the border.
أصحاب الجرين كارد أو الفيزا لما توصل لما الحدود لا توقع أي ورقة. لو قال لك وقع أي ورقة ما توقعش أي ورقة، خصوصا إذا لم تكن مكتوبة باللغة أنت بتفهمها 100% عارف على إيش بتوقع. أو مثلا أو تقول المحامي راجعها على قبل ما توقعها. ليش؟ لأن بعض الذين وقعوا على ورق فيها تنازل عن الجرين كارد حقهم، يعني طواعية بتنازل عن الجرين كارد حقهم ويزفروهم. فإذا لما تروح ما توقعش أي ورقة إلا إذا إيش أنت فاهمها في 100. أصحاب الجرين كارد وأصحاب الفيز، بعض الناس عملوا هذه وقعوها وخاصة صعب جدا أنهم يرجعوا لأمريكا. بعد ما تخلص هذا الجرين كارد والفيزا بس. السيتيزن مشان توقع أي حاجة. السيتيزن ما حد يقدر يمنعك إنك تدخل.
It's very difficult to get your citizenship taken away. That requires a very strict court process.
عشان يشيلوا الفيزا السيتيزنشيب حقك لازم تروح المحكمة والقاضي يحكم إنهم يشيلوا السيتيزنشيب.
And it's very important to know, and it's very important for us specifically because I know our population, and especially after 9/11, we tried to be very helpful. We don't want to seem like we're not helpful or we're not U.S. citizens or we're not being good citizens. So sometimes we answer questions. Sometimes we think it'll make it easier. Sometimes they'll tell you it'll make it easier. If you let me see your phone, we can clear this all up. But I'm telling you, we have rights for a reason. And the most patriotic U.S. citizens always exercise their rights. They're talking about them all the time. It doesn't make you difficult. It doesn't make you a troubling person. It doesn't mean that you have anything to hide because you don't want to answer questions. What it means is you know your rights and you want to protect yourself from the intrusion by the government. And it's very helpful for you later because what we see is people who have difficulties at the border who answer questions, they have longer and more difficult problems at the border. They get held more frequently. They get held for longer periods of time. They have problems that they would not have had they just said no. My mom told me one time, it's easier to say no from the beginning than it is to stop doing something that you've already agreed to do. So once you start answering questions, it'll be very difficult and they'll become more hostile and more aggressive in how they approach you and how they try to keep you to answer questions. So it's better just to say no from the beginning.
مهم بالنسبة لكثير من المسلمين خصوصا بعد أحداث 11 سبتمبر أنهم يوري نفسه أنه إنسان محترم وودود ويجاوب على الأسئلة وكل حاجة، وينظر إليها أنه خلاص أنا بهذا حق التعاون معهم أنه بيسهل لي الأمور حقي وبيسيبوني بسرعة. ولكن أنت لديك حقوق، والناس الوطنيين في أمريكا عارفين لديهم هذه الحقوق ويهتموا فيها ويحاولوا الإبقاء عليها. أنك لازم تفهم حقوقك، وهذه الحقوق تحميك من تطرف الحكومة وتطفلها عليك. في بعض الناس اللي يتم احتياجهم بيفكر هذه الكلمة، بيقول ليش أنا بتعاون معهم، بس إيش بيتسبب هذا لما تبدأ تتعاون وتجاوب على الأسئلة تنزاد سؤال بعد سؤال بعد سؤال بعد سؤال، هذه تسبب قد تغلط قد تقول حاجة غلط ويمسكوك فيها. فهو من السهل جدا أنك من البداية توقف الأمر، تقول أنا ما أجابش على الأسئلة وخلاص، أن هذا بالنسبة لك أفضل. أنك لما تفتح لهم الباب خلاص يستمروا في الأسئلة. تعطيهم مثل قال أي حاجة في حياة الإنسان من السهل أنك تقول لا من البداية، سهل تقول لا، بس إذا وافقت ودخلت فيها خلاص بعدين صعب أنك تخرج منها. فهي تنصحكم إيش؟ اعرف حقوقك وما تقولش أنا خلاص بساعدهم وبعطيهم. لو قلت هذا الكلام بيلاقوا فرصة وبيزيدوا الضغط عليك لما يلاقوا لك حاجة يوقعوك فيها.
Okay, so just to close out this portion and summarize, if you're a lawful permanent resident or U.S. citizen, you have some rights at the border and you should exercise those rights. And you should not answer questions that are not related to your direct border entry or your identity. If you're a visa holder and you think that they might not let you in, you should withdraw your request for entry. You should, if you're a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you should never open your phone and you should take action to protect your electronic devices from intrusion. And if you are held for more than an hour, you should ask to see a supervisor.
باختصار الأمور هذه، طبعا إذا كنت مواطن أمريكي ما لهم حق يسألوك إلا إيش 3 أسئلة، يعرفوا الآي دي حقك من أين أنت ولا فين سافرت وإيش معك جبت. أصحاب الفيزا إذا حسيت إنهم بيرفضوا طلبك دخول أمريكا اطلب منك إيش؟ إنك تسحب الطلب الدخول. الحاجة الثالثة إنك لا تفتح تلفونك لأي واحد إذا أنت متجنس أو معك جرين كارد، وإنك تحاول تحمي تلفونك من قبل ما تروح المطار، يعني تمسحه ولا حاجة ولا حاجة. وإذا إنك جلست أكثر من ساعة في الحجز من حقك كمواطن أمريكي أو جرين كارد إنك تتكلم مع السوبرفايزر.
And if you have difficulties while you're traveling, when you try to come back in the U.S., for instance, if they've pulled you for secondary screening more than one time, or they've seized your electronic device, or if the next time you leave and come back, you have difficulties traveling, or they seize your electronic device, call our office. There are things that we can do. It's routinely that we do on a regular basis to assist people with their clearing up their travel issues. So call CAIR Michigan if you have any difficulties traveling.
تقول إذا حصل لكم مشاكل خلال التفتيش الثانوي أو تم مصادرة أجهزتكم الإلكترونية أو دائما بيسحبوك يفتشوك كل ما تسافر أكثر من مرة، فهم كمكتب كير ممكن يساعدوك في هذه الأمور ويحاولوا حلها، فاتصل بالمكتب حقهم هم بيتواصلوا معك ويساعدوك في هذه الأمور.
So the next portion of the talk, I'm going to talk about law enforcement, like if you're already in the country, either at your home or maybe a traffic stop. Everything I'm saying now applies to equally to everybody, regardless of your legal status. The Constitution of the United States and the rights that are afforded by the Constitution of the United States protect all people found in the U.S., regardless of status. That means U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident, visa holder, or somebody who's an undocumented migrant, all have the same constitutional protections in the United States when it comes to law enforcement. And the most protections you have from law enforcement is when you're in your home. And we know that the FBI comes about 5 times more frequently to Muslim homes than they do to the general population, without any actual evidence of any criminal wrongdoing for that encounter.
الآن نتكلم عن حقوقك في داخل البلد، مش في الحدود داخل البلد. تقول القانون الدستوري ينطبق على الجميع، ما لهش أي علاقة بوضعك القانوني أو وضعك الهجرة، يعني هذا القانون ينطبق على الجنسيين، على اللي معهم الجنسية، اللي معهم جرين كارد، اللي معهم دخلوا هجرة فيزا، أو حتى الناس اللي ما عندهم أوراق اليوم دخلوا تهريب ولا حاجة. لك نفس الحقوق الدستورية، وهذه الحقوق أكثر ما تكون لما تكون في بيتك. نحن نعرف إن مثلا تقول إن FBI دائما معدل حضورها إلى بيوت المسلمين 5 مرات أكثر من معدل حضورها إلى بيوت الناس الآخرين، حتى بدون أدلة وبدون أي حاجة تحضر تعمل تحقيقات وهذه، فلازم نعرف حقوقنا في هذه الأوضاع.
Whenever you encounter law enforcement, whether it's in your home, in the street, in your car, or at your workplace, you always have the right to remain silent, which means you don't have to provide them with any information at all. If they ask you questions, you don't have to answer any questions. Sometimes we think of they have to tell us that you don't have to answer questions, but that right is affirmative. All you have to say is, I'm not going to answer any questions. If you have an FBI agent or another law enforcement agent come to your house, they are never allowed to enter your house unless they have a search warrant.
طبعا في البيت وفي الشارع وفي السيارة من أول حقوقك حق البقاء صامتا، يعني مش هم لازم يقول لك إنه من حقك إنك، يعني هذا حق مؤكد 100%، يعني مش لازم تجاوب على أي سؤال من سؤال إذا أنت ما تحب هذه الحاجة، قل لهم أنا مش عاوز أجاوب عن أي أسئلة. طبعا بخصوص FBI إذا حضرت لبيتك عشان يدخلوا لبيتك لازم يكون عندهم حاجة بيسموها أمر بحث من المحكمة، ما يقدروا يجوا يدخلوا هكذا بدون أي سبب، لازم يكون معهم أمر قضائي إنهم يدخلوا للبيت.
If you have a law enforcement officer come to your house and they don't have a search warrant, the only thing you should do is you should open your door, you should ask them for a business card, and you should tell them, I'm going to have my attorney call you. If the FBI comes to your house, or the law enforcement comes to your house, you call CAIR Michigan. We represent people with the FBI on a regular basis. If it's a law enforcement matter, we might, for state or local law enforcement, we will likely refer you out to an attorney. but you take their business card, you say thank you, and you shut the door, and you go back in your house, and you have no further contact with the FBI. If Brother Dawood was here, he would tell you his favorite saying is no chai with the FBI, because we're not inviting them into our house to have tea with them.
اوكي، اذا قلت لعندك الاف بي اي او اي هيئه تنفيذ قانون اخرى وما عندهم امر قضائي انهم يدخلوا ولا حاجه بيسموها سيرش وارنت، فانت فقط تفتح لهم الباب، قول لهم اشي البزنس كارد حقكم. اول ما يعطوك البزنس كارد قول لهم انا بخلي المحامي حقي يتصل فيكم، يعني ما يقولوش يقول لك لا انا بدخل ولا حاجه. طبعا بعد ما تحصل البزنس كارد ممكن تتصل بكير وهم يحاولوا يشوفوا ايش الامر وكل هذه الحاجات. واذا مثلا امر جنائي ولا حاجه ممكن يبعثوك على محامي اخر عشان يشوف ايش هذا الامر. قالت ان الاخ داود وليد دائما بيقول ما في شاي مع الاف بي اي، يعني ما تقول لهمش انك تجي تعزوهم داخل تدخلهم تجيب لهم شاي، يعني نظرتها بالشرع انك ايش ما تثقش في، ما تقولش انا بحسن نيه بدخلهم حاجه، يعني مش يلاقوا لك حاجه يوقعوك فيها، انت ما تعاملش بحسن نيه، يعني يفترض انهم مش يوقعوك وفي مصيده.
If the FBI comes to your house and they say that they have a search warrant, you have the right to look at the search warrant. And it's very important that you look at the search warrant because law enforcement will lie to you. They'll tell you they have a warrant and what they have is a subpoena, which is not a warrant. Or they'll have a document that says warrant on it, but it doesn't meet the criteria. So the first thing you do when somebody presents you with a search warrant, if it's the FBI, is you look at it. You make sure that it has your address on it because they've been known to be incorrect sometimes. So it has to have your address on it. It will also have a signature of a judge. If it doesn't have your address on it or the warrant is not signed by a judge, it is not valid and they cannot come into your house and you couldn't shut the door and call your attorney.
إذا أجت الاف بي اي يودعون معهم أمر قضائي بتفتيش البيت، من حقك أنك تطلع على هذا الأمر القضائي قبل ما تخليهم يدخلوا لما البيت، لأنه في حادثات حصلة هم بيكذبوا عليك، ومثلا معهم أمر استدعاء لك أنك تحضر أمام الجهة ويكذبوا عليك يقولوا هذه هي أمر تفتيش. بعض الأحيان قد يكون مكتوب عليها أمر تفتيش وارنت بس في الحقيقة بيكذبوا عليك مش هي أمر تفتيش، فمنك لازم تقرأها وتأكد أن عنوانك عليها، وتأكد أيضا أن فيها موقعة من قبل قاضي وقع عليها. فإذا ما فيش هذه الحاجات، إذا العنوان مش موجود فيها توقيع، أنا حقك ترفض تقول لا أنا ما بسمح لكم انكم تفتشوا ولا يمكنكم الدخول، وبعد تتصل بكير وهم بيتفاهموا معهم.
If the warrant is valid, it has your address on it, and it is signed by a judge, you have to let them in your house, but you should film them. You're always allowed to film law enforcement encounters in Michigan. Michigan does not have a law that prohibits it, so you can film every law enforcement encounter in Michigan, and you should absolutely film them. You should stay out of their way. Don't bother them. Don't obstruct what they're doing. Don't be in the way. But film them, because if they break something or they take something or they say something is there or isn't there that you don't have on film, and there's a dispute between what you say and the law enforcement officers say, unfortunately, given the position they hold in the United States, they're going to be believed. But if you have it on film, there's no disputing what's on the film. And we've seen over the last 5 years especially how important filming law enforcement encounters are when it comes to our safety, when it comes to asserting our rights, when it comes to protecting the lives of minorities who engage in law enforcement encounters. Filming them is essential in any law enforcement encounter you have, other than at the border where you can't film, but we're talking about in your car, in your home, in your school, in your workplace, on the street. You should absolutely film every law enforcement encounter, especially if they're searching your home.
إذا كانت الأمر القضائي بالتفتيش قانوني في عنوانك وفيه توقيع القاضي، فيجب عليك في هذه الحالة أن تدعهم يفتشوا البيت. من حقك خلال التفتيش أن تقوم بتصويرهم بالفيديو، تصور إيش بيصلحوا بس بدون أنك تعيقهم، يعني تقف في طريقهم، يعني تصور من بعيد. ليش؟ إنهم لو كسروا شيء أو أخذوا شيء أو ادعوا أن في شيء موجود وما كانش موجود، معك دليل. إنك لو رحت المحكمة، وهذه المحكمة عادة بيصدقوا جهات تنفيذ القانون الاف بي اي الشرطة، ما بيصدقوكش أنت. فبس إذا في تصوير وفي فيلم وكل حاجة ما حد يقدر يناقض هذا الدليل. ونحن رأينا أهمية التصوير لأن في الحاجات اللي تحدث مع السود، الأخوة السود لما بيصوروا وبيشوفوا إيش الحاجات الفظيعة اللي تحصل، فهذه التصوير حماية لك وحماية للأقليات بشكل عام، طبعا ما عدا في الحدود ما يحق لك أنك تصور، ولكن في هذه الأمور في تفتيش المنزل من حق لك أنك تصور هذه الأمور.
If they search your house and they take something out of it, they'll give you a list of items that they take out. You also can have a lawyer present while they're searching your home. So if you have a lawyer, you should call them to the home. If you don't have one, you can call our office. I have went out to people's houses when they've gotten searched, and if I can't make it out, I have referred other attorneys to them who can. But it's very important to understand that even when they're in your house and they're removing items, don't say anything at all. Like don't talk to them, don't ask questions, don't make comments, because all of those could lead to conversations that you could find yourself in a problem later.
إذا أخذوا شيء من البيت هم مفروض يعطوك قائمة بالأشياء اللي أخذوها، ومن حقك خلال التفتيش أنك تتصل بمحامي يراقب هذه الأمور، أو إذا ما عندك محامي ممكن تتصل بكير وهم بيرسلوا لك واحد يراقب هذه الأمور، أو يودوك لعند محامي ممكن يجي يراقب هذه الأمور. وحتى وهم بيفتشوا بياخذوا أشياء يفضل أنك لا تسألهم أي أسئلة، لا تكلمهم أي كلام، لا تعلق أي تعليق، لأن هذه الأشياء توصلك انك تتكلم اكثر واكثر ومعلومات اكثر واستجوابات اكثر، فهذه بتوقعك برضه في نفسها، فانت ايش قص صامت ما تتكلمش وما تقولش اي حاجه.
The other type of document that the police might come to your house with is an arrest warrant. And an arrest warrant is just what it sounds like. It's when they are going to come and they're going to take you down. They think you've committed some form of crime, so they're going to take you down to the police station. An arrest warrant does not allow law enforcement to enter your home unless you are hiding the person that is on the arrest warrant and they know they have actual information that that person is there. So if the police show up with an arrest warrant for somebody, you check the arrest warrant, you see if it's for somebody in your house. If that person is there, that person should go out onto the porch to be arrested and leave peacefully with the police to avoid any problems with the police coming into the home, because it does not allow them to enter the home.
الأمر الثاني الذي قد يحضروه لما يقول على البيت حقك يسموه arrest warrant، أمر بالقبض. الأمر بالقبض يعني إيش؟ إن في جريمة ارتكبت هم لازم يقبضوا على اللي ارتكب الجريمة. أمر القبض هذا لا يسمح لهم إيش؟ إنهم يدخلوا البيت برضه، إلا إذا أنت كنت تخبي الشخص داخل البيت تقول له مش موجود، بس هو موجود وهم عندهم أدلة إنه موجود فقد يدخلوا في هذه الحالة. فأنت تقرأ أمر القبض، وإذا تشوف إن الشخص اللي مكتوب اسمه في أمر القبض موجود عندك في البيت تكلمه ويخرج لما البلكونة البورتش وهم يقضوا عليه من البورتش نفسها. أما أنك تدخلهم مش ملزوم أنك تدخلهم.
And if you're being arrested, or not even arrested, sometimes law enforcement will say, I want you to come down to the station with me, we need you to answer a question. That's being detained, that's not being arrested. But if you are being removed from one location to another location by law enforcement for any purposes, you have the absolute right to an attorney. You have the absolute right to remain silent. And you should absolutely utilize both of those rights exclusively. But your right to an attorney does not kick in until you tell the police that you want an attorney. So you should tell them affirmatively, I would like my attorney present before I answer any questions, and I am refusing to answer questions until my attorney comes. That's how you assert your right to remain silent. And they don't have to, people think that they have to notify you that you have the right to remain silent, and all of these rights that we hear on TV sometimes, in these movies and programs on TV, but I'm telling you, they don't have to tell you that you have those rights. The only time that they have to tell you those rights is if they're going to ask you questions and you're under arrest, not even if you're being detained. If they've arrested you and they want to interrogate you, they have to tell you that you have rights. But if they're just detaining you and they haven't arrested you yet, they don't have to tell you. And they'll try to strike up a conversation with you. And I'm telling you, when I did criminal law, you cannot believe how many people got themselves in trouble just from talking to the police when the police were not asking them any questions. So it's better to just not say anything other than I would like my attorney.
إذا تم القبض عليك أو طلبوا حضورك إلى الشرطة للمساءلة. ف طلب الحضور طبعا ما يعتبرش قبض، بس كحجز يحجزوك عشان يسألوك أسئلة. فلديك الحق في أنك يكون عندك محامي، ولديك الحق في أنك تبقى صامت، مش لازم تتكلم. ولكن لازم تقول لهم أنا عاوز هذا الحق، يعني لازم تقول لهم أنا اشتيق أجيب محامي، ما بجاوبش عن أسئلة لما يجي محامي، ولن أرد حتى يأتي هذا المحامي. مش لازم يقول لك انك في عندك حق في محامي، ولا انت حق في محامي، وانك حق انك تبقى صامت. هذا فقط يحصل اذا قبضوا عليك، اذا حطوك تحت القبض. بس اذا حجزوك في الشرطه بدون امر قبض، من حقك انك تقول لهم مشي محامي، وما بجابش اي حاجه الا لما يجي هذا المحامي. بنشوف الافلام والمسلسلات يقول لك انك من حقك انك تبقى صامت، من حقك هم مش لازم يقول لك هذا الكلام، فقط ملزمين يقول لك هذا الكلام اذا قبضوا عليك واذا بداوا في تحقيق رسمي، ملزمين. فبعضهم كثير من الشرطه تلاقي انه يبدا بس يتكلم معك كلام، ما يقبضوش عليك انت في الحجز فقط. في الشرطه يحاول انه يبدا معك محادثه وكلام، وانت توقع نفسك انك تتكلم معهم، يعني تتكلم هذا من قبل ما يقبضوا عليك، فانت تدبس نفسك اكثر فاكثر. فهي تنصحك انك ايش؟ ما تتكلمش لاي حاجه. اذا قالوا انك مقبوض عليك وبنبدا معك التحقيق، اتصل بالمحامي حقك وما تجاوبش رساله الا بوجود المحامي.
And the last thing I want to say about law enforcement is it's very important to remember that you cannot lie to law enforcement. You cannot lie to law enforcement. It is a felony, which means you can go to prison, state prison or federal prison, for lying to law enforcement. They can lie to you, and they will lie to you. It is a very well-known tactic, but you cannot lie to them. It's very important to remember this. And it doesn't have to be a big lie. It can be a small lie. We had a case when I first came to CAIR Michigan in 2017. We had a case where there was a Pakistani lawful permanent resident. They put him on the no-fly list when he flew back home to Pakistan for the first time after he had come to the U.S. We sued the federal government to bring him back to the United States because they can't do that. He has a right to enter. He has his green card. We successfully sued and we won the right for him to re-enter the United States. The day that we won our lawsuit, they indicted this brother. And they indicted him for lying to the FBI about how many Facebook pages he had. It could have been an innocent mistake because he said he had one. And they said, well, he actually has two, which is true. But in his mind, he was only using one. The other one was old, so it didn't exist. They indicted him with a 7-year felony over Facebook pages. So it is very important that you do not lie to law enforcement because it does not have to be a lie about anything, and they can still charge you with a crime.
في الأخير مهم جدا أنك لا تكذب على جهات تنفيذ القانون. يعني هي تعتبر جريمة وقد تؤدي بك إلى سجن الولاية أو إلى السجن الفيدرالي. من حقهم هم أنهم يكذبوا عليك، يعني يقول في ناس شافوك كله كذب يعني عشان يطلعوا منك معلومات، ولكن ليس من حقك ايش ان تكذب عليهم، حتى لو كانت الكذبه كذبه صغيره او حتى كانت معلومات خاطئه. عشان كذا تقول لكم المفروض ما تتكلموش. تعطي مثل عن اخ باكستاني كان معه جرين كارد، ذهب الى باكستان، فهم الحكومه حطته على قائمه عدم الطيران، مش ما يحق له انه يجي لامريكا. يعني لما يروح المطار يحطوا اسمه يقول له ممنوع من دخول امريكا. فراحت المنظمه كير رفعوا قضيه على اساس انه يرجع، من حقه كحامل جرين كارد انه يرجع الامريكيه. فربحوا القضيه وقالوا له يرجع، ولكن بعدين اكتشفوا ايش؟ ان الاف بي اي وجه له اتهام بانه كذب عليهم. ايش هذه التهمه؟ كيف كذب عليهم؟ قالوا لهم لما سالوه كم عدد صفحات الفيسبوك حقك، قال لهم معي صفحه واحده. بس قالوا انت في الفيسبوك، هو من عقله تقريبا كان عمل صفحتين بس الصفحه ما كان يستخدمها بالخالص فنسيها، وصفحه بيستعملها دائما، فقال على اساس ان الصفحه اللي بيستعملها، قال انا عندي صفحه واحده. فاللي قال انت كذبت علي، انت قلت عندك صفحه واحده على الفيسبوك ولكن عندك صفحتين. فوجهوا الاتهام، وهذه التهمه عقوبتها 7 سنوات في السجن. فمهم جدا ان لا تكذب عليهم او لا تعطيهم معلومات خاطئه. فهذه توضح النقطه اللي قلت عليها، انت كل ما تكلم اكثر وكل ما كان زياده انك تخطي وتعطيهم معلومات غلط، هم ما بيعتبروش انها هذه غلطه عادي نسامحوا فيها، بيعتبروا انها ايش؟ انك بتكذب عليهم، تسبب مشاكل.
The Pakistani brother that we sued and then they indicted, he didn't come back to the United States because he was afraid of facing federal charges. So this brings me back to the very first statement that I made. We do not talk to law enforcement under any circumstances. And the reason we don't talk to law enforcement under any circumstances is, number one, because we don't have to. And number two, because if you say something that is different than what they think they know, or is different than the information they already have, or is an innocent mistake, they can turn it around on you and say that you're lying, and then they try to come back to clear that up, and then they talk to you more, and then you make some more mistakes or you misspeak, and then you have a charge for lying to law enforcement because they can't charge you with anything else because you've never committed any crime. So they charge you with something very small and something big for something that's very small. And they would never have the opportunity to do that if we don't speak to them. So since we don't have an obligation to speak to them, we should never speak to them and for any reason other than to assist ourselves. I'm not saying don't go to law enforcement if you've had a crime committed against you or if you see something that's a crime. Under those circumstances, absolutely, we have information, we should be sharing that information. But when they've come to us and they want to ask us questions about ourselves, but we know we haven't done anything wrong, we don't have to answer those questions, and we absolutely should not.
طبعا الأخ الباكستاني هذا لم يرجع لأمريكا بعد توقيع الاتهام، لكن خاف أنه يرجع لأمريكا بيسجنون 7 سنوات بسبب هذه التهمة. فهذه توضح النقطة أنك لا تتحدث إلى جهات تنفيذ القانون تحت أي ظرف من الظروف. أول، أنت مش ملزوم أنك تتحدث إليهم، وثانيا أنك إذا قلت شيء حتى مثلا يختلف عن اللي معهم مكتوب أو شيء حتى خطأ بريء ولا حاجة، سيقوموا باتهامك بأنك تكذب عليهم ويحاولوا يتكلموا معك أكثر، وكل ما تكلمت أكثر كل ما زادت أخطائك، كل ما زاد مثلا الحاجات اللي قلتها مش مضبوطة وكل حاجة، ويوجهوا لك التهمة أنك بتكذب عليهم. فإذا بشكل عام لا تتحدث إليهم، لأنهم لما تروح المحكمة لازم كل حاجة تكون مثبتة، وقال كذا كذا. إذا ما تحدثش مش زي اليمن نقل الساكت خلاص يعني هو مجرم ولا حاجة، فلازم عندهم أدلة، قال كذا عمل هكذا. فلا تتحدث إليهم إلا إذا كان سبب. مثلا إذا مش معنى هذا أنك ما تتكلمش، يعني لو حد مثلا جاء جريمة حصل ضدك أو حد سرق بيتك أو حاجة، في هذه الحالة أنت تروح تكلمهم حصلت سرقة هذا. بس لما يقولوا عندك أنت ويطلبوا منك معلومات ويطلبوا هكذا، من الأفضل أنك إيش تظل صامت.
So I think we already have some questions, but I think we'll open it up for questions. And I know Sheikh Yasser also had concerns about some things that are going on at the Hamtramck City Council with regards to religious slaughter. So if anybody that has concerns about that, we'd like to, that's something that we're looking at. So we'd like to invite you guys to give us what your concerns are so we can look to see whether or not the new ordinance that they're going to be enacting is going to address any of those concerns.
سنتكلم الآن عن الأسئلة، تجاوب الأسئلة، وفي نفس الوقت بعدها ممكن نتكلم عن أمر الأضاحي في هامترامك والقانون هذا. أوكي. يقولون أن الخط الأصفر في المطار قبل لا يحق لهم استفسار أي شيء ولو كنت جنسية، ولا يحق لك طلب محامي، فماذا الجواب للمحقق؟ He says the yellow line in the airport, before it, they have a right to ask you anything even if you're a citizen, and you have no right to ask for an attorney.
That is what they would like you to believe, but that is not true. They can ask you any questions they want. Whether or not you're required to answer them is a different story. If you're a U.S. citizen, the only questions you have to answer are questions that are able to prove that you're a United States citizen, questions about where you've traveled to, and questions about what you're bringing back. If you refuse to answer any other question, it doesn't matter. They have to let you in the United States. So whether they can ask you those questions, yes, they can. Do you have to answer them? Absolutely not. And they'll tell you you don't have a right to an attorney, but if they're holding you for more than 2 hours or 3 hours, you're considered to be in custody. Anytime you're in custody, you have an absolute right as a U.S. citizen to an attorney.
يقول لك هذا الكلام هم اللي يحبوك تعتقد انه كلام صحيح، ولكن هذا كلام غلط. فانت كمتجنس جنسيه امريكيه ما لهم حق الا يسالوك 3 اسئله تثبت لهم انك متجنس، الدول اللي سافرت لها، وايش انت احضرت معك لما رجعت. واذا تم احتجازك لاكثر من ساعه او ساعتين فانت تعتبر محتجز، ومن حقك انك تجيب محامي، حتى لو قال لك انك مش من حقك تجيب محامي. ماذا نعمل عندما يمنع العائلة الكبيرة أن تعمل أكثر من $1000 رغم أن تذاكر حق العودة تكلف أكثر من هذا المبلغ؟ وكيف تعيش أثناء الإجازة؟ إيش قصدك تعمل؟ يعني يخرجوا معها أكثر من 10,000 ولا؟ أو من 10,000. He says, what do we do when they prevent a large family from exiting with more than $10,000, even though the return ticket is more than that? And how would you live overseas with this amount only?
So the law is very clear. You can take $10,000 or less per traveling family. So if you have 6 people in your family and you're all traveling together, you cannot have 10,000 each. You have to have 10,000 total between the 6 of you. If you have more than that, they will take your money and kick you out of the airport. If that happens, call CAIR Michigan. I'm very good at getting people's money back because we have this problem a lot. So the law is clear. There's nothing you can do about it. What you have to do is you have to set up a bank account or overseas and wire the money to yourself overseas. When I travel overseas with my family, that's what I do. I have a bank account, I wire my own money overseas. Because you cannot travel with that much money. Unfortunately, the law is very clear. There is a way that you can file a FinCEN form, a FinCEN 105 form, to notify them in advance, but it's very tricky to do because you have to prove how you got the money, and I've seen people travel with that form and still get the money taken from them. So it's better not to do that.
تقول الحد القانون واضح جدا في هذا الأمر. الحد الأقصى هو 10,000 العائلة كلها، ما تقولش مثلا معي 6 أطفال كل واحد 10 10 10 10. إذا عائلة مسافرة مع بعض $10,000 لكل عائلة. الحل طبعا انك تفتح حساب في البنك في البلاد اللي انت رايح لها وتحول الفلوس عبر الواير ترانسفير وتصرف منها هناك. هذا اللي بتعمله هي لما بتسافر معها حساب هناك وتحول فلوس ليه. بعض الاحيان بيقول لك في فورم تعبيها، انك لما تعبي الفورم هذه وتقول معي فلوس كذا 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 كذا، ولكن هذا الامر مش مستحب لان الامر فيه شويه يعني مشاكل. بعض الاحيان قد في ناس عملوا هذه الحاجه ونفس الشيء وقدموا الفورم وكل حاجه وفي نفس الوقت لا زالوا اخذوا منهم الفلوس. فالافضل انك تحولها عبر البنك. لا، العائله كلها. Even if the kids are adults.
Even if the kids are adults, I saw a grandmother, daughter, and granddaughter traveling together. All 3 of them adults, and they took their money and kicked them out of the airport.
قد شابت عائلة كانت الأم والجدة والبنت معهم كل واحد 10,000 أخذوا منهم الفلوس. This is a question for me. What decides if whether they're traveling together or not? What if you claim that you're not traveling together?
If you booked your flights together, you're traveling together. If you reside in the same house in the United States or overseas, you're traveling together.
قد يعتبروا أنكم إذا أنتم عايشون في نفس البيت أنتم حجزتوا مع بعض كل حاجة أنكم يعني جزء واحد في 10,000 هذه. لو حتى أنت ساكن في نفس البيت يعتبر أنك حتى لو جزعت لحالك. هل توجد منظمات خارج أمريكا تعمل على دعم منظمات أمريكية لمحاربة المسلمين والمساجد داخل أمريكا؟ Are there any organizations outside America working to support American organizations who are against Muslims and mosques inside America?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Are there like foreign organizations supporting Islamophobic organizations in America?
I'm not. That's not something I would have information on. I don't think.
هذا الشيء ليس لديها معلومات عنه. لماذا يتم تحويل معظم المسافرين القادمين من اليمن إلى غرفة المهاجرين؟ يعني قصدك الحجز صح؟ من دون أي سبب. Why do most travelers from Yemen are automatically transferred to, I think, questioning room without any reason? He says when they go to the guy who stamps the passport, they send them to the immigration room. I don't know.
It's probably secondary screening. So, to be honest with you, it's difficult to say, but the truth of the matter is, it's just blatant discrimination, honestly. And it's not just Yemenis. We see it specifically with Yemenis. We see it with Syrians. And right now we're seeing it, actually the most targeted group in that are returning to Michigan right now are Lebanese from South Lebanon. Like they're having a much worse time than the Yemenis are right now, honestly. But it's just blatant discrimination. They're racially profiling, they're religiously profiling, and they're profiling based on national origin. And that's something that we're actively fighting. We have, I think, CAIR has 7 active federal lawsuits against the Department of State over their watch listing and their religious and racial discrimination at the border.
اوكي، بتقول لك ان الامر تمييز، يعني بيميزوا ضد اليمنيين. بتقول لك مش فقط اليمنيين، لان في هذه الاوقات اليمنيين السوريين وفي الوقت الحالي اخص يعني جماعه يتم التعامل معهم هم اللبنانيين اللي من جنوب لبنان. يعني يفترض لك ان الامر هذا تمييز عنصري على اساس الدين او من اي بلد جيت فيه. He's asking about them. Sometimes they put the passports in a green envelope, sometimes in red, sometimes in yellow.
So it's just like the stoplight, right?
Yeah.
So green means go, yellow means like a little bit caution, and red kind of means stop, and there's going to be a problem. So it's just a way. So it's hard to explain because what we know is that the government doesn't have one list. They have a series of lists. So you could be on the no-fly list, right? Then you're not flying. That's the most severe list. Then they have a watch list, and then they have the selectee list, and then they have the monitor list. So they have different levels of lists. So when they have a large influx of travelers from a certain country, they can do that to help, organize and screen people like visually, so they're not wasting their time on somebody that they don't believe is a problem. And I'm telling you, like men, especially men between the ages of 17 and 25, are going to be the most scrutinized people right now coming back from overseas. We know this. We know if a father has had travel issues in the past, the minute his son turns 16, 17, 18 years old, his son is going to have very significant travel difficulties. This is what we know. So it's just a way for them to visually sort and organize people.
يقول لك هي طريقة عشان يحددوا كمية الخطر، زي السلاجات حق المرور، أحمر خطر، أصفر مش أخضر مشي. فيقول لك عندهم قوائم كثيرة، يعني في عندهم قوائم، يعني قائمة أول قائمة ممنوعين من السفر، القائمة الثانية المراقبين، يعني عدة مستويات. فهذه هم بيستعملوها عشان يسهل الأمور عليهم كيف يخلصوا من الناس. فتقول لك معظم الناس خصوصا الشباب اللي هم من عمر 17 إلى 25 هم اللي يركزوا عليهم أكثر حاجة. وحتى بعض الأحيان إذا الأب مثلا كانوا بيركزوا عليه من قبل، أول ما ابنه يصل له سن 17 وفوق بيركزوا كمان على الابن، يعني حاجة يورثوها. ما هي أشهر قضايا ربحت كير وهي تدافع عن المسلمين؟ Is what are the most famous cases CAIR won while defending the Muslims?
That's hard to say. We won a lawsuit against the Department of State, where the watch list that they're actually using to scrutinize Muslims at the airport was deemed unconstitutional. I think that's the biggest lawsuit that we've ever won. We have won 2 lawsuits in the state of Michigan. One of them we just won in October for masjids, where cities were trying to keep a mosque from opening. And we were able to go in, we had to sue the city, and we were able to force them to allow a mosque to open. Last year we won 3 lawsuits against the Michigan Department of Corrections to enforce the rights of Muslims, especially Muslim women who are incarcerated, to be able to wear their hijab in prison and in their photos and the photos that are put on the website. So we do a lot of different types of cases. We have school cases, discrimination cases, but I think the most important cases that we've had so far have to do with mosque opposition and also the watch list.
قضايا كثيرة رفعوها. أهم حاجة كان قضية ضد وزارة الخارجية، الذي رفعوا عليهم قضية لإثبات غير دستورية قائمة مراقبة المسلمين. قضايا ضد عدة مدن التي منعت مساجد من الفتح، فيروحوا يرفعوا عليها قضية وفي النهاية يسمحوا للمساجد بالفتح. قضايا عن حقوق المسلمات في السجن في لبس الحجاب، أما في السجن أو حلما يصوروهن ويحطوا صور على الويب سايت. فهم يعني في مجالات كثيرة وكثير من القضايا، حتى المدارس وهذه الحاجات. هل يحق لهم أن يسألوا عن خصوصيات المسافر؟ وهل له الحق على الامتناع عن الجواب؟ Are they allowed to ask you about your private matters, and do you have a right to stop answering?
If you're a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, they don't have the right to ask you about your private matters. They can't ask you about whether you're married. They can't ask you how many times a day you pray. They can't ask you what you do for a living. They can't ask you about. I've seen people say that they ask me about my brother who's never been to the United States. They can't do that. They're not allowed to ask you any of those types of questions. And if you're a U.S. citizen and a lawful permanent resident, you can absolutely decline to answer those questions. You can just say, I'm not answering that. Let me into my country.
اوكي، تقول اذا كنت حامل جنسيه او معك جرين كارد ما لهم حق يسالوك عن حاجات خصوصيه، يعني زي ما قلنا 3 الاسئله فقط، فين راحت، ايش معك، جبت، وانت جنس. ما لهم حق يسالوك عن مثلا مواضيع الخاصه، فين تشتغل، او عن الزواج، حقك من متزوج للحياه، او عن بعض الناس يسالون عن اخوه في البلاد، ما لهم حق يسالون عن اخوه في البلاد. فانت بكل سهوله تقول لهم انا مش عاوز اجاوب عن هذه الاسئله. اوكي. تزوج زوجته ودخل الزوج ثم عمل زوجته اولاده. This is like an immigration question. He married and brought his wife and kids here, and he still have 2 kids in Yemen. He didn't mention them in his paperwork, and now he wants to bring them here. What do you suggest?
I would suggest you talk to an immigration attorney. I do very little immigration work. Most of the immigration work that CAIR does centers around unusual delays in adjudicating applications. But if you have left out information from an immigration application, or it could pose a problem for you, so you need to speak to somebody who does exclusively immigration work. And if you have a specific question, you can call our office. I can refer you to 2 really good attorneys who will give you really good advice that I know and trust personally.
اوكي، يقول هم مختصين بالحقوق المدنيه مش بحقوق الهجره، ما عندش خبره كثيره في الهجره، بس هي تقول احسن حاجه تواصل مع محامي هجره. ممكن تتصل فيهم، هم بيرشحوا لك، في عندهم محامين كويسين جدا، بيرشحوا لك 2 منهم معامله. يعني الحل الوحيد اللي دخلوها في الهجره قالت هي لما تكون المعامله اخذت وقت طويل. How long is it before you interfere? Delays in
It depends on the type of application. So some applications, they have like a turnaround rate of like 6 months to a year. If it's been more than 18 months, we'll get involved. Some of them are a lot longer than that, so it's a case-by-case basis.
يقول لكم بتداخلوا لما تنزاد عن حدها. لو مثلا الابلكيشن بياخذ سنه و6 شهور لسنه ولا 18 شهر، هم ممكن يتداخلوا في هذه الامور.
But if somebody's been in administrative processing more than 6 months, they can call our office and we will look at it.
فإذا لكم أكثر من 6 أشهر في الادمنستريتيف بروسس ممكن تتصل بهم، هم بيحاولوا يساعدوك. هل صحيح أن مجلس العلاقات الإسلامية الأمريكية CAIR يدافع عن حقوق الشواذ؟ Is it true that CAIR defends the rights of LGBT?
That is categorically untrue. That is something that we have caught a lot of problems for this year specifically, because we have actually went against the interests of the LGBTQ community, and we suffered a lot of negative press and a lot of backlash, and a lot of people calling our office. We 100% only protect the rights of Muslims in Michigan, and we do so within the bounds of the Islamic faith and the general principles as they're understood by the mainstream Muslim population. We don't deviate from the tenets of Islam at all within our advocacy work.
أقول هذا الأمر غير صحيح بالمرة. هم يعني يتبعوا النظام الإسلامي وقوانين الإسلام ولا يحيدوا عنها. خصوصا هذه السنة يعني في إشاعات تنشر بهذا الأمر ودائما ينكروها، يعني ما في شيء دعم، يعني هم ملتزمين بالقواعد الإسلامية. هل في سؤال ولا حاجة؟ طبعا في سؤال هنا عن تعدد الزوجات، بس ما له علاقة في في القانون الأمريكي.
هو مسموح إنه يسألك الضابط كم معك فلوس خرج وين أنفقتها وكم بيجت؟
Is it allowed for the immigration officer to ask you how much money you took and how much money you spent there and how much money you bring it back?
So yes to some of that and no to some of it. They can ask you how much money you're taking with you, and they can ask you how much money you're bringing back. If they get into asking you about how much money you spent over there, that's not really up to them because they don't know. Maybe you have a business over there, maybe you wired funds over there. The only concern is how much money you left the country with and how much money you're bringing back because that's governed by law.
لهم الحق فقط تسألوا كم خرجت وكم رجعت، بس كم صرفت برا وكم ذا يعني ما لهم حق فيها. قد يكون عندك بزنس هنا، قد تكون حول الفلوس، يعني هذه مو ما لهم الحق. لهم الحق فقط تسألوا كم خرجت وكم دخلت. تفضل.
موضوع الزواج، هل مثلا هذا نتعرض له احنا الان مثلا الحمد لله ما قد مش عارف هكذا، بس بيجوا ناس يقول لك اعمل لي عقد هو زوج يعني الامريكي ويقول لك اشتري عقد اسلامي زوج واحد ثاني بدون ما اسجلها للاحوال المدنيه، ويقول لك هل هذه تدخل تحت الحريه او حريه ممارسه الشعائر الدينيه او ممارسه الحريه الحق الديني وكذا، هل ايش موقف الامام يعملها ويعملها؟
Okay, he's saying that some people, they already married officially, and they come to the sheikh and ask him they want to marry Islamically without recording the marriage. Now, what's the position of the imam? Is he allowed to do it as a religious practice, or he's not allowed to do it?
So, that might be something we could discuss later, but the legal position is that it is against the law in the state of Michigan to engage in polygamy, which means that it's not recognized as a legal marriage, first of all. Second of all, if it's not recorded, it's not technically a legal marriage. So having an Islamic-only marriage is not recognized as a marriage in the United States, whether or not you have a legal government marriage. That's the short answer.
I think his point, as an imam, is he allowed to do it?
I mean, legally, it's a very tricky question because engaging him, I think that's a very nuanced legal question. It's not as easy as it is to sit here and answer that, because the act of polygamy is a crime in Michigan, but that means going down to the court and getting married to more than one person legally. So I'm not sure that an Islamic marriage would meet that legal definition. I also, as a lawyer, cannot advise you to do something that may skirt the law.
هي تقول لك ان في ولاية ميشيغان الامر غير قانوني، بس في نفس الوقت اصلا ما يعترفوش بالزواج هذا، يعني هو مش معترف فيه. يعني الغير قانوني انك تروح لما بيطلعوا اللياسن وتتزوج اثنين، طلع ليسن زوجتين، هذا بيسجنوا كل حاجه، بس عشان الزواج مش معترف فيه، فهم لك ما يعتبر زواج اصلا. فهذا الامر يعني يحتاج فيه تفاصيل دقيقه، وهذا فهي ما اقدرش اقول لك اي حاجه يعني تخالف القانون، بس ما تقدرش تعطيك اجابه محدده.
I also want to say that there are other implications other than that, like whether you can record it, because we don't live in a country that applies Sharia law. If you have a legal marriage and a marriage that's not recognized legally, the person who has a legal marriage has rights that the other woman would not have when it comes to who can have access to your assets after you die, who can bury your body, inheritance rights. It has other legal implications other than just that legal right, and that's something that needs to be considered when we're doing that, when there is like a legal marriage and a not legal marriage. And there are ways to do inheritance rights, like we have wills, we have trusts. That's also something that CAIR Michigan does. We have a workshop that we do, but outside of whether or not it's okay to do it, it has like legal marriages have legal inheritance implications that are not in compliance with Sharia law when we do them here.
تقول لك ان الاضافه انا غير معترف فيه، هذا يؤدي الى عده مشاكل. مثلا لو تزوجت واحده قانونيا وواحده قانونيا، يعني فقط القانونيه لها من حقها انها تورث، من حقها انها تحدد طريقه الدفن، من حقها انها تعمل حاجه، ف ما يقدروش يتخذوا القرار. يعني يقول لك ايش يعني في عوامل كثيره تتداخل في هذا الامر، بس هم في كير معاهم ما ممكن تروح لعندهم، هم بيعملوا وصايا او بيعملوا أوراق هذه الحاجات ممكن يساعدوك في هذه الحاجات. هل في أسئلة ولا خلاص؟ خلاص, they say thank you for coming, and we thank her from the masjid for coming and teaching you.
No, I was going to take questions. So my understanding is Hamtramck passed an animal ordinance, and the animal ordinance that they passed no longer has an exception for religious worship. They are in the process of passing a new ordinance that has an exception for religious worship, but it puts some restrictions on it. For instance, you have to notify the city 7 days in advance. You have to pay a fee, and you have to schedule an inspection of your slaughter site after the slaughter happens, and you have to make sure that nobody who doesn't actively want to see the sacrifice sees it. So we are having an internal debate at CAIR, and we're taking shura amongst ourselves and amongst the attorneys and scholars that we have in our organization, because our board is filled with people with, we have Brother Dawood who's imam, and we have other people, and we have other attorneys besides myself who are on the board, about whether or not we think that that's in compliance with the law and with what, you know, the needs of the Muslims are. So we wanted to see if given the fact that they're going to be passing this ordinance in January, very likely, if the community still had concerns about this ordinance and the way that it's now drafted. So it was going to take comments or questions or concerns about that, if anybody had any.
يقول لك انهم بخصوص قانون الذبح في هامترامك، هم طبعا طلعوا قانون ممنوع يذبح في هامترامك، بس الان يتم اعاده صياغه هذا القانون، يريدون اعمال السماح به، ولكن باستثناءات انك لازم تدفع رسوم للسيتي، لازم تشعر السيتي انك بتذبح، وبعد الذبح لازم يجي انسبكشن تاكد المكان نظيف وكل حاجه. فهم لا زال عندهم نقاش في جمعيه كير بين المحامين ومعهم علماء على المجلس الإدارة، وهذا بنزل بيناقشوا هذا الأمر، وهل هذا الأشياء اللي يحطوها هل هي متوافقة مع القانون الأمريكي وحقوق المسلمين. فهي يعني مفتوحة أنها تأخذ منكم أي تعليقات أو كلام يستفيدوا منها في هذا النقاش. ما لي شيء أول واحد.
So the, so for two reasons. Number one is because you're going to be requesting a permit to do it, and number two, because they're going to be sending out the city inspector to inspect your property to make sure that you cleaned it up appropriately. So somebody has to pay. The city's basically bankrupt, honestly. Hamtramck is basically bankrupt. They don't have any money. So in order to add something to the job of somebody else, they have to find a way to pay for that, to be honest with you.
Is it realistic? Like, Hamtramck is 85% Muslim. Is someone going to be able to go through all the homes?
I mean, do I think it's realistic? No. Do I? No, I don't. I don't understand how they're going to do this. I don't understand why they were going to do this. And I have my own opinions about how this even came to fruition anyways, but I don't know. And I think, like, on Eid Day, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that, right? And but they're also a lot concerned about people having aqiqahs and nikahs and things like that and slaughtering in their yard for things like that. So I think on those occasions, it's probably more realistic, but on Eid, I doubt it.
هو سهل قالش السيتي عاوزة تفرض رسوم على عملية الذبح، فالجواب إنه الرسوم بتكون عشان البرميت، إنهم بيكون يرسلوا واحد يفحص المكان بعد الذبح يتأكدوا كل شيء نظيف وكل حاجة. ثم قال له هل هذا شيء ممكن عمله، خصوصا معظم هامترامك مسلمين في العيد، فقالت إنه صعب يعملوه في العيد كل الناس بيذبحوا هذا، بس قد يعملوه لما يكون عندك عقيقة ولا حاجة ثانية، حاجات سهلة. طاهر.
Yeah, it was just to clear some. I know Nasser, he knows more than me, and he can correct me. I think what they came up to that if you want to do the slaughtering, you have to notify them. I think there is no fees for the permit.
There's a fee.
I've read it.
Fee.
There is a fee for the permit.
Now you have the mayor mentioned, I think he didn't mention that.
They have fee, they have permit, yeah.
How much is it?
They don't have it listed, so it's going to change year by year.
I think what I understood, I could be wrong, you notify them, but if you didn't, there's a charge or a fine.
Mhm.
If they come and inspect and they see it is not clean enough, they can fine you.
Mhm.
And about the dumpster, I think the city will provide the dumpsters.
So I watched the video. There's two ways to get the information about what takes place at the city. You can watch the video and you can read what they've actually drafted that is what they're trying to pass. And what is written down is the only thing that will be enforced. What's being said will not be enforced. So what's written down is that you will have to notify them 7 days to get the permit, and then you will have, on the day you get the permit, you have to schedule the inspection and pay the fee. And the fee will be decided each fiscal year, so it's not set. And you're right, if they come out and they inspect and they don't like what they see, you're paying a $400 fine. It's not a small fine. It is the biggest civil money penalty fine that the Hamtramck has. They have some other animal ordinances. If you violate those, you're paying $100 to $150 less than what you would pay for violating this provision of that same ordinance. So yes, there is a $400 fee, but there is definitively going to be a fee for the permit and for the inspection.
شيخ ياسر خلاص اوكي طيب
It's time for Salat.
خلاص we're later.
الناس يقولوا انه يعني القوانين مشدده وكأن فيها يعني انتقام، لأن في قوانين في هامترامك كثيره العقوبه حقها مش مغلظه، لكن زي يشوفوها كذا كأن فيها يعني انتقام او استهداف.
He's saying the penalties seems like too vengeful for Hamtramck Muslims.
I feel like there's a lot of problems with how this came about, and this concern was raised by somebody who I think is not culturally adept to the culture of Muslims and the culture that is the slaughter as it relates to Islam in general, and has brought with them some other ideologies. So I have concerns about that, and we have some internal concerns about the fine and about the permit fee, because if you're paying $200 to buy a sheep, right, for slaughter, and then you have to pay another $100, that's going to be cost prohibitive for some people. Let's be honest, it really is going to be cost prohibitive, but they have a right to put some restrictions on if they're reasonable. So that's why we wanted to meet with the city. And if you guys want to sit and amongst your community group, come up and decide whether or not this is, something that's tenable for you guys, or you have concerns, and then come back to CAIR Michigan, we welcome that. We advocate for you guys, and we'd be more than happy to sit down with the city attorney, who I know the city attorney is a nice guy, and see if we can fashion something that's a little bit more reasonable for the city of Hamtramck. But it's all based on what the community needs and what the community wants.
قالت هي تقريبا القانون هذا اللي كتبوه ما عندهمش إدراك بأمر هذا الأمر الحساسيات الثقافية لدى المسلمين، بس هم بشكل عام كانوا مستعدة تجلس مع سكان هامترامك ومناقشة الأمر مع السيتي ومع المحامي. إن هذا الأمر يعني أصبح متعب جدا، يعني بيروح الإنسان يشتري كبش $200 ويطلع برمت $100 وبتثقل كثير على الناس. فهم لا زالوا بيناقشوا هذا الأمر ومستعدين يجلسوا معنا ومع السيتي ويصلوا له حل مناسب. Thank you very much Sister Amy. جزاكم الله خير على حسن الاستماع. أي واحد كنت واصل. Do you have business cards for CAIR? ما حاب business cards I think.
I don't know if I have any. We just got new business cards, so I'm not sure if I brought any of my own.
Yeah, okay, just write the number and they
I will
could.
definitely do that.
You could write the number and they could take a photo with their phones.
Yes, and I'll put my email address on there as well.
Yes. Salam.